All right. Hello, everyone. Let's get started. We will begin appearances. I'll start with Plaintiff.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Gurvin, and I'm joined by my co-counsel, Mr. Sandeep Sikandar.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Today, we'll be representing the estate of Samuel Farnsworth, the plaintiff in today's case.
Thank you so much. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Annabelle Claypoole, and I'm here with my colleague Brianna Morris. Good afternoon, Your Honor. Together, we represent the city of Philadelphia. Okay, sounds good. Thank you both. So let's start with the pre-trial ruling. We have already established our housekeeping matters. Does anybody have any questions about any of those items?
No housekeeping matters, Your Honor, but we have one evidentiary matter.
Okay, let's get into it.
Yes, Your Honor. Before trial, both parties agreed to pre-admit an additional exhibit, Exhibit 1, which is a picture of the decedent Sam Farnsworth.
Okay, is that your understanding? It is. We have no objections. Okay, all right, so that was pre-admitted.
Yes, Your Honor. With that, we're ready to go to opening statements.
Whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Fence the poles, grease the poles. They should have done both. For most of us here in Philly, February 9th, 2025 should have been an amazing day. The Super Bowl, the Birds are playing the Chiefs. It's the rematch that we wanted. And we all watched as the Eagles put up 40 points, and it wasn't even close. The Eagles are Super Bowl champions. That is where our case today begins. Because for 23-year-old Sam Farnsworth, what should have been one of the best days of his life turned out to be his last. Sam was in Center City with his best friend Annand. They were watching the Super Bowl. And when we won, they took to the streets and they joined the fans in the celebration. Then Lanny came across lightning. It was ungreased. So she decided to climb all the way up. She slips. She falls. She lands on her friend Sam, killing him. This didn't need to happen, and it shouldn't happen. Because the city of Philadelphia, the defendant today, they knew that this would happen because this always happens. From the 2018 Super Bowl, the first time we won, to the 2022 Phillies run, to just 2 weeks earlier with the NFC Championship game. This is what Philly fans do. They take to the streets and they climb like walls. February 9th was no different, but for the defendant, it should have been. Because they should have done both. Today, you're going to learn that for every event like this that happened before 2025, the city of Philadelphia had greased their poles to keep people from climbing up them. But after 2025, they stopped greasing the poles, and instead they just put a fence around. The fact is, they should have done both. And if they had, then Sam would still be alive and we wouldn't be here today. But we are here. So on behalf of the family of Sam Farnsworth, we're here to sue the city of Philadelphia for negligence. That means that today we're going to prove to you that it was the city's actions or failure to act that was the most likely and most responsible cause of Sam's death. We have a burden to prove this to you by a preponderance of the evidence. And today we're going to prove that to you and meet that burden by proving one simple fact. They should have done both. You're going to hear from Lanny Davidson, that's Sam's friend. And she's going to tell you that there was a fence, but she just climbed right over it. And if it had just been grease, then she would have never been able to climb up there. And if she never climbed up there, then she would still have her best friend. Or if the police had done anything to try to stop her, or if the city did anything but watch and know and do nothing to protect them or stop them. That is what makes this case so tragic and so simple. Fence the poles, grease the poles. They should have done both. But because they didn't, Sam is dead. And by the end of today's trial, we will have met our burden by a preponderance of the evidence. And when we do, I'm going to come back up here and ask you to find the city liable. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Your Honor. Now again. Lanny Davidson chose risk over reason. Members of the jury, the plaintiff just stood up here and told you so they didn't. But our city was so reckless, so careless, they let one of their own citizens lose their life. But what the plaintiff didn't tell is that our city went to unprecedented lengths to keep its citizens safe then. What the plaintiff didn't tell you is that they were pushing and pushing to improve on their mistakes in the past, to keep their citizens safe, to try to prevent these exact kinds of tragedies from happening. And what the plaintiff didn't tell you is that it was one person's decision that brought us everything, not the decisions of our city. The decisions of someone named Lanny Davidson. Someone who decided to put their own life and the life of their friend in danger. Someone who decided for risk for a reason. And that's why we brought a counterclaim of comparative negligence against the plaintiff. And as the judge will explain, the elements of that claim are very strict. We just have to prove, more likely than not, which is the same standard the plaintiff holds today, that the plaintiff's friend, Lanny Davidson, failed to act reasonably. And that failure was a significant contribution to Sam Farnsworth's death. But that's exactly what we'll prove. And we'll do it by asking you to focus on 3 simple questions as you listen to the evidence. First, did our city care about protecting our state? Second, were Philadelphia's actions reasonable? And third, who did Sam beg to stop? So let's start with that first question. Did our city care about our city? Because plaintiff's counsel just stood up here and told you that decision was so reckless, so careless that they didn't care whether those people lived or died. He told you over and over and over again that they should have done more. But what you'll learn today is that was a key fact that was missing. They couldn't do both. That one of those measures was dangerous. Greasing those poles, it put those citizens in danger. That's the reason they made that cut. That they made that cut because they cared. Which will bring us to that next question: were our city's actions reasonable? Now, time and time again today, I expect the plaintiff to offer evidence, try and make arguments to you about how we cut corners, made mistakes. Members of the jury, today you'll learn that each and every one of those decisions was justified. That we spent hours planning and trying to make sure we didn't make the mistakes we made in the past. In fact, we'll call the director of safety in our city herself. She'll tell you about the tragedies our city has faced. How we've made mistakes, that greasing the poles wasn't a perfect strategy. That's why we had to get rid of it. And you'll see that decision was reasonable. Which will bring us to our third and final question. Who did Sam beg to stop? Now, in just a few minutes, I'm going to sit down, and the plaintiff is going to call their first and only witness to the stand. It's that name I told you, at the beginning of my opening statement. Lanny Davidson. And we're not gonna pretend that Ms. Davidson isn't just as much of a victim of this accident as her friend. That what happened to her is terrible. But as you listen to her testimony today, I want you to consider the choices that she made. Whether they were responsible, whether they were reasonable. When you do, you'll see. It's actually really straightforward. That it's not about a careless thing. It's about a friend who made a mistake. Members of the jury, no one is going to stand up here and tell you that what happened to Mr. Farnsworth that day is okay. What? And we know the plaintiff isn't gonna act like the city of Philadelphia's job. It's difficult. What? And as we listen to the evidence today, it's gonna be so easy to give in to the pain and the anger we feel for Sam's family. It would be easy. But it wouldn't be right. Because as a juror, you have an obligation to apply the law to the evidence, to use your reason this afternoon. And when you do, you'll see it was Lanny Davidson's choices that brought us here. That Lanny Davidson chose risk over reason. And that's why at the end of this trial, I'm going to ask that you find the city of Philadelphia not liable. Thank you. Thank you. Like to call your witness.
Yes, Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Lanny Davidson to the stand. And before the witness testifies, can we place a binder of all the exhibits in front of the witness? Sure. Proceed. Could you please introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. My name is Lanny Davidson.
Would you mind telling the jury a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a law student. I go to UCLA Law, 2L, second year. I want to focus in environmental law. That's what I'm up to now.
Why are you here in court today?
Well, Sam was one of my best friends, and during the Super Bowl, I made a mistake, and he ended up dying that night.
When was it that Sam died?
February 9th, 2025.
I'm sorry for your loss, Ms. Davidson. Would you recognize a picture of Sam if I showed it to you?
I would.
Could you flip to exhibit 1 in that binder you have in front of you? What do you see in front of him?
This is a picture of Sam. I actually took it. He was applying for jobs, he needed headshots, so helped him out of it.
Your Honor, I'll publish exhibit 1 to the jury. Would you like a copy? Ms. Davidson, how did you know Sam?
Well, we actually met when we were back in college. We both took piano lessons, and I remember there was some mixer, and told him my favorite song was California Dreamin'. Tried to play it. Not great, but I appreciate the effort. I learned he was from Philly, and we stayed in touch ever since.
Before we go any further, I want to be upfront about 2 things. The night that Sam died, were you drinking?
I was. We both flew into the city. It was, game day drinking. Sam was a big sports fan, took me to a bunch of bars. I was drinking, yes.
Were you drunk?
I wouldn't say so. I had a few beers. I think normal game day drinking. I wouldn't say I was drunk though, no.
Second, did Sam's family ever blame you for what happened?
Yeah, I get it. After what happened, they came to me, they brought up a lawsuit, but then they changed their minds. So I settled with them, paid them $1. agree to testify.
Objection under Rule 403. This is substantially more prejudicial than probative. May I explain? So the witness is talking about a lawsuit that was settled under the same standard of proof we have in court today, honorings of the evidence. And the key fact of contention today is whether or not Ms. Davidson was responsible for her friend's death. That's the same preponderance standard for them to hear about this prior instance in which she settled out of court with Sam's family. It goes to prejudice them. It's inadmissible.
Response, Your Honor? Your Honor, this testimony, it's not being used to give the jury a legal analogy to say that because of the settlement in this lawsuit, that they should have some belief about how the standard works in the lawsuit that we're adjudicating today. It's just being used to give the jury some context for who this witness is and how they got it.
May I respond to that? Plaintiff's counsel is free to give context about who this witness is and how she got here without bringing in inadmissible evidence. But they're talking about a lawsuit that happened outside of this court, a whole separate matter that was settled under the same standard of proof the jury has to apply today. That's unfairly prejudicial. Let me ask you this. Why is this information appropriate?
Your Honor, it's simply to allow the jury to know that the witness did settle out of court with the family that is currently suing the defendant right now. It's to let the witness or the jury know that there was a previous connection, just so that they're not being kept in the dark about that fact.
Okay, considering that explanation, I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Motion to strike. It's your.
Ms. Davidson, I want to move to February 9th. Where were you and Sam watching the game?
We were at this bar, Gillen's, we had a few drinks there, won, and then afterwards we joined the celebration.
Where did you go?
The streets, I mean, I'm sure you've seen after every big game here in Philly, it gets a little bit crazy. And especially after this one, everyone in the bar going out, partied. Yeah.
Was there a particular place that you ended up that night?
Yes, it was actually right outside this building, Chestnut and 12. We ended up there.
What did you do when you got to that corner?
We noticed this light pole. It's right in front of the building, and I told Sam, I was like, what if I climb?
Did you climb it?
Yeah, I did.
How high did you climb?
I think it was maybe 15 or 18 feet or something like that.
When you were climbing the pole, did a police officer stop you?
No, I mean, there were a few police officers there. No one said anything to me. There were a lot of people cheering me on, and I just did.
When you got to the top, did you hear or see any police officer tell you to stop or come down?
No,
What happened when you got to the top?
I was at the top and people were cheering, and Sam was at the bottom. All that he was telling me to get down, not to do it. I wasn't listening, and I just remember a foot slip, and I lost my balance.
What happened when you slipped?
I fell down the pole, and I fell on top of Sam.
Did Sam make it?
No, he hit his head on what the metal fence that I used to hoist myself onto the pole, and I kept shaking him. He wasn't responding. I was really trying. He did not make it.
I'm very sorry for your loss, Miss Davidson, but I still have a few more questions for you, okay?
Okay.
Have you ever been to a Philadelphia sports celebration before?
Yeah, back in 2022, when the Phillies won the World Series.
Did you climb a light pole then?
No, they were greased up back then. The city, I saw they put like some sort of grease on there.
Would you recognize an image of one of those poles greased up?
I would.
Could you turn to exhibit 22 in the binder in front of you?
Yeah.
What do you see there?
This looks like a pole that's been greased up.
Does it look fair and accurate to the poles you've seen greased in Philadelphia?
It has.
Your Honor, we move to enter exhibit 22 into evidence.
No objections.
Yeah. We're also publishing Exhibit 22. Would you like a copy? Oh, perfect. Did the pole that you saw in 2022, did they have fences around them?
No, they didn't. Only the one on Super Bowl night.
I want to compare that to the ones on Super Bowl night. Would you recognize a picture of one of those poles with a fence around it?
I would.
Could you turn to Exhibit 35 in that binder?
I'm good.
What do you see in front of you?
This is a picture of a pole with a fence around it. It kind of looks like the fence that was around the pole on Super Bowl night.
Does it look fair and accurate to the poles and the fences that you saw that day?
It does.
Your Honor, move to enter Exhibit 35 in fence.
No objections.
Yes, Your Honor, we'll publish into the jury. The pole that you saw in 2022, you mentioned that it didn't have a fence around it. That was the one with grease, right?
That's right.
The pole that you saw in 2025, did it have a fence around it?
It did. That's what I used to kind of hoist myself onto the pole then.
And the pole you saw in 2025, did it have any grease on it?
No,
Ms. Davidson, if that pole that you saw in 2025 had both, would you have climbed it?
if it had grease on it, no, I mean, grease is slippery. I wouldn't have tried. No, I don't think so.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. Nothing further.
Yes, Your Honor. Ma'am, before we get started, I just want to say I'm so sorry for your fault.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm just gonna ask you a few questions about that night, all right?
Of course.
The reason you were out with your best friend was because you guys were celebrating the Super Bowl, right?
That's right. Sam was a big sports fan and he took me along for the ride.
And like you told us on direct examination, those celebrations, they got pretty happy.
They did.
You saw people screaming that night
Yes,
and cheering
yes,
and singing.
yes.
You decided to take things a step farther, didn't you?
I did. That's right.
When you walked outside, you saw a lamppost, didn't you?
That's right.
That lamppost was 18 feet off the ground.
It was, yes.
You thought it would be fun, to climb that thing.
Yeah, at the time, people were egging me on. I shouldn't have done it, but at the time, yeah, I thought it would be fun.
Hold on, ma'am, you just said people were egging you on. Isn't it true? The decedent in this case, Mr. Farnsworth, he told you. Dude,
Yeah, Sam said that. I meant the other people in the crowd. Sorry.
after he told you to stop, you ignored him.
Yeah, I did.
But then I want to focus on the measures the city had in place to try and prevent these things.
Of course.
You have that exhibit binder up there with the gun.
I do.
Could you flip to exhibit 35? And I already have it open.
I'm there.
And if you need a moment at any time, ma'am, please just let me.
No, I'm good. I'm sorry.
So this is that fence you talked about on direct examination.
Yes, this is the one that was up around the pool.
Right, it was set around the pole. It made it seem like an turn, didn't it?
I don't know about that. I mean, I kind of used it to hoist myself onto the pole. But I see what you mean, yeah.
So to be clear, ma'am, you chose to climb over this fence.
That's right.
You chose to go against this safety measure.
I did.
When you saw this fence, you didn't think, oh, maybe that's up there for a reason.
I climbed over it. That's true.
That's now you didn't think maybe that's up there for a reason.
Yes, you're right.
When you saw this post, you didn't think, oh, maybe climbing 18 feet in the air, that's dangerous.
Not at the time. I made a mistake. I know. I'm very sorry.
So let's take a closer look at that mistake you made. Because after you climbed over that fence, your friend Sam, he told you again, stop.
He did.
You ignored him.
I did.
You kept climbing.
Yeah, he kept telling me not to do it. Should have listened. I'm sorry.
When you got to the top of that post, you looked down at him, didn't you?
I did.
You told Sam you're next.
Yeah, and he, of course, shook his head at me. He wasn't gonna do what I was doing.
That's right, he shook his head, no.
Yeah, he didn't want to go up. He wanted me to get down.
That was the last time you saw Sam alive.
That's right. When I slept.
You fell 18 feet.
Yes.
You walked away with just a few scrapes and bruises of concussion.
Objection, Your Honor, to relevance under 401.
111.
Yes, Your Honor. The injuries that Ms. Davidson sustained, they make no fact in today's case more or less likely.
Response. Your Honor, it makes it more likely that, excuse me, the fact that she was exposed to injury in this case makes it more likely that she would have known to take precaution. Climbing 18 feet in the air, that's something that could create a dangerous situation. Talking about the injury she sustained goes to our argument about whether or not her decision was reasonable.
Response, Your Honor. Whether a decision is reasonable needs to be considered prospective, not retrospective. The consideration is whether a reasonable person should expect to be injured based on what they were doing. And that can come out through what Ms. Davidson did. But the result, the actual injuries that she sustained, they don't make it more or less likely whether she was acting like a reasonable person.
Your Honor, may I respond to that further? The prospect of injury was clear in this case. It was 18 feet, 2 stories off the ground. And just by listening to this testimony, getting it all onto the record, we're showing the jury how that prospect, it was an
Brief response?
Oh,
Yes, Your Honor.
no, I'm sorry to ask again, but you sustained a few scrapes and a concussion.
That's right. I didn't get as hurt as Sam did.
Your best friend lost his life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Sorry.
Someone's focus on whose choices brought us here today, ma'am.
Yes.
Because the city of Philadelphia, they didn't force you to climb that.
No.
That was your decision.
Yeah, doing games like this, I've seen it done before. The choice to do it. You're right.
And isn't it true? The reason you made that choice was because you thought it would be fun.
Yeah, at the time, I did.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. I have no further questions. Have you worked?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Davidson, if the pole you climbed on 2025 had been grease, would you have taken the risk?
No. Grease makes it harder to climb, makes it slippery. I wouldn't have done.
Nothing further.
So me based on that, you have no details. We did not, Your Honor.
May the witness be excused.
Ms. Davidson, you're excused.
With that, the plaintiff rests our case in chief.
Probably move straight through unless anybody has an emergency to leave. Now we're ready to go. Okay, sounds good. Do you have a witness? Yes, Your Honor. We call the defendant, the representative of the defendant in this case, Walker Evans. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Please state your name for the record.
Hello, everyone. My name is Walker Edwards.
What do you do for a living?
I'm the Director of Public Safety for the City of Philadelphia.
What does that job entail?
I come up with the safety plans that keep people safe during major celebrations, whether that's public parades or celebrations following major sports league wins. If there's an event, we've got a plan for it.
So how long have you been working as the Director of Public Safety?
Since 2016 now.
I want to talk a bit more about your professional background then.
Sure.
Where'd you go to school?
Well, I did my bachelor's degree at UCLA in criminal justice, and then I did my master's of public policy at Drexel.
And do you have any professional certifications in your field?
I do. I have a few in crowd management. I'm both certified by FEMA to manage crowds, as well as the National Association of Fire Marshals.
Do you know why you're here today?
Unfortunately, I do. I was in charge of safety for the 2025 Super Bowl when the Eagles won. That was the night that Sam Farms were.
And then I want to talk a bit more about the events leading up to that night. Was that the first big event like that in the world?
No, there had been several leading up to that event, starting back in 2018, which was the first major league sports celebration. I had come up with a plan.
Could you tell this jury a little bit more about the plan you developed for that 2018 game?
So I'm sure you've seen it before, whether with your own eyes or on the news, but us Philadelphians like to climb light posts. And so in 2018, I came up with the idea to start greasing those posts, make them unclimbable.
How did that work?
It deterred some people, of course, as expected, but we couldn't stop everyone. People kept climbing those poles, even though they were greased.
You said people kept climbing those poles. What did you do in response?
Well, we decided to shake up our plan after a couple years of it still not preventing people from climbing the posts. That was in January of 2025. We decided not to grease the poles that year.
And how did that work?
We have found that greasing the poles might have, instead of been a deterrent, been something that attracted people to climb, almost daring or challenging them. But unfortunately, in January of 2025, during the NFC celebrations for the Eagles, a young man climbed an ungreased pole and he fell. He ended up passing away.
I want to help the jury understand your response to that situation.
Of course.
After that man passed away during the NFC playoff games, I think,
Yes.
what did you do in response?
Well, I got together with my team. We only had 11 days before the Super Bowl, and so there was a chance that there could be another major celebration if the Eagles were successful. I also got on the phone with the mayor. We wanted to make sure we were ready.
So what sorts of measures did you guys take to try and make things more safe?
Well, the one thing that was new for the Super Bowl this year is that we launched a social media campaign to create awareness, to get people to stop climbing posts.
Would you recognize a post from that campaign if I showed it to you?
Of course,
You have an exhibit binder in front of you?
I do.
Can you turn to exhibit card 3, please? And I'm showing this to plaintiff's counsel. May I tender a copy of the bench? Or you already have a bench, but may I publish, or actually I'll wait till I admit it. All right, ma'am, do you recognize what's in front of you?
I do, yes. This is an Instagram post from that social media campaign.
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
Looks like it to me.
We offer exhibit 33.
No objections, Your Honor.
Okay. May I publish to the jury now? No. Here you go. So ma'am, what does this post tell us?
Right there in the picture, it says attention Philly, don't climb light poles. And if not everyone recognizes that, that's our mayor, Rachel Holt.
And what was the intent behind this campaign? Who were you trying to appeal to?
Younger people who were likely to use social media, likely to be celebrating.
Was this the only measure that you had in addition after that person passed away?
No, of course not. But we knew that if we weren't going to be greasing the poles, we had to do something else. And so we decided to go with fences around the lampposts.
You turn to exhibit 35.
Yes.
Is this one of those fences?
It is. This is one of the fences we had around the lampposts all up Broad Street and in Center City in preparation for the 2025 Super Bowl.
Was a fence like this around the lamppost that Lanny Davidson climbed?
Yes. It was the lamppost just at the corner of the street, Chestnut and 12, and the fence that was there that night looked exactly.
So do you know how Lanny Davidson got to the top of that lamppost?
She would have had to climb over the fence.
Objection, Your Honor, to lack of personal knowledge.
Okay.
Yes, Your Honor, the witness's testimony is about how Lanny Davidson would have had to behave. They have no personal knowledge as to what Lanny Davidson did that day.
Yes, Your Honor, this is rationally based on, in the witness's perception under Rule 701. As you can see, there's a fence guarding this post. There is no way to get through without fight.
Yes, Your Honor, there are other ways to get through, removing the fence or putting something else near it, but that's not particularly relevant. The point is the witness can't testify to what Lanny Davidson did that day. They don't have personal knowledge to say that.
Is there a way that this witness, has this witness reviewed any information about somebody who was on site? I'm assuming she was not physically present. She wasn't physically present, Your Honor. She was the director of safety. She would know these kinds of things, but we can lay more foundation. I'm gonna ask that you lay the foundation for what she reviewed or what she knows based on documentation, not a person who's saying she would have had. Okay, there's a statement.
Yes, Your Honor, motion to strike that.
We'll strike it out and ask your question.
Yes, Your Honor.
So just to make sure we're all on the same page here, were you able to determine how Lanny Davidson might have gone over a measure like this?
I reviewed a police report that indicated that she had climbed up the light post on the night of February 9th, 2025, the Super Bowl.
And do you know what happened after Lanny Davidson climbed up that light post?
Yes. When she got to the top, she slipped and she ended up falling on the person that was beneath her.
Ma'am, we have to talk about some of the plans. The plans made down to the end. Ms. Edwards, did you decide not to grease and put a fence around that post for planning?
No, the fence was a measure we implemented after that death that happened in early January 2025. That wasn't a decision we made for money. And the not greasing the poles, we made that decision because they had become something that attracted people to climb them, not deterring them.
So Ms. Edwards, can you explain why you didn't just do both?
Well, in addition to attracting people to climb those poles and making it more likely, when you grease the poles, it of course makes them more slippery. That's the whole point. So if someone was able to climb the poles, it would be more likely that they slip and they can get very, very hurt.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions. Okay. Examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed? Good afternoon, Ms. Edwards.
Good afternoon.
I want to start by talking about why you are here.
Sure.
Your job is Director of Public Safety in Philadelphia.
Yes, it is.
That means your job is to keep the people of Philadelphia safe.
Yes. It's my job to come up with plans for major celebrations and events to keep people safe.
That includes all of the fans out there celebrating these big wins in the city.
Yes. Sports events were one of the major events that we did.
You remember being deposed before this trial?
I do, yes.
And you remember being asked how much responsibility you take for Sam's death?
I do.
You remember your answer?
Not off the top of my head, but we took the measures that we needed to keep the city safe.
You answered that question. How much responsibility do you take for Sam's death? With absolutely zero. Is that right?
If that's what I answered, I'm sure it is. Again, I can't remember off the top of my head that specific line for my deposition. It was a couple months ago.
Well, your answer was that you don't take any responsibility for Sam's death. Yes?
Wrong.
Would the plaintiff mind just letting the witness finish? Yeah, go ahead and let her finish.
Yes. Please continue.
I was just going to say, if you have a copy, I'm happy to confirm for you. That's what I said. But it's been a couple months. I don't know if that's my exact wording. But what I do know is that the city took all the precautions to keep people safe.
Well, ma'am, I'll ask you now. Right now, you take zero responsibility for Sam's death.
Me personally and the city of and the Office of the Public Safety, we don't take responsibility for Mr. Farnsworth's death. No, you're right.
In fact, you would say that you can't stop stupid.
I think if people are determined to do something like climb an 18-foot light post, some things will not deter them, like we saw with the grease. Even greasing the poles didn't stop people from climbing up some as tall as 55 feet in the air.
That's a yes that you would say. As Director of Public Safety, you can't stop stupid.
I think if people are determined to act contrary to reason, that's what they're going to do.
Is that a yes?
It is, yes.
Let's talk about whether you try. Because for years now, you've greased the poles in the city to keep people from climbing.
Yes, between 2018 and all the way up until 2025, that was our major way that we kept people safe.
That was your idea.
In 2018, yes, I was the first one to do it.
And you said that this idea, it was common sense.
Yes, if people were having an easy time climbing up the poles, we wanted to make it harder for them so that they couldn't get a grip and get all the way to the top.
But for all of the major celebrations from 2018 to 2025. You used your common sense and you greased the polls.
Yes, we greased the polls in each of those years for any celebrations for major sports league wins.
I want to go through each of those celebrations one at a time.
Sure.
So starting in 2018, first celebration, you greased the polls. How many people got it?
No one was injured. There were reports of climbing, but no one actually was hurt because of it.
Okay, the second celebration in 2018, you greased the polls. How many people got it?
We greased the polls with a different product that time. It was slipperier. No one was injured, but again, there were still reports people had been climbing.
2022, the celebration then, you greased the polls. How many people got it?
Again, no injuries, but an increase in the number of people who were climbing them, up to 15 now.
2023, again, you greased the polls. How many people got it?
No injuries, but again, an increase in the number of people year over year that were climbing those.
The first celebration of 2025, that was the first time that you didn't grease the polls.
Yes, we were piloting our safety plan that was no grease and no vents.
At that event, the first time you didn't grease the polls, how many people died?
One man, Nasir Muldrow.
The second celebration of 2025, again, you didn't grease the polls. How many people died?
To be clear, this was not greasing and with the fences, and unfortunately, Mr. Farnsworth died. Just one.
I want to break down those two deaths a little further. Because those two celebrations, they were 2 weeks apart.
Yes, it was the NFC Championship and then the Super Bowl, 11 days apart.
So after you piloted your program to not grease the polls, somebody died.
That's true. Without the fence there, he fell and he tragically passed away.
And then you decided to continue this program for the next 2 weeks. And another person died.
It wasn't the same program, no.
Will you continue to not grease the polls?
In addition to adding the fences around every lamp post in the city.
And another person died.
Mr. Farnsworth fell. Yes, that's true.
I want to talk about why you stopped greasing the polls. You told the jury a moment ago that it wasn't for money.
Yes.
Are you telling this jury that money is not a consideration?
No, of course, money is a consideration. When we're thinking about where to put our money and what safety measures to implement, we have to pick the ones that are going to be the most effective. We had seen that greasing the polls, it wasn't effective anymore. So we weren't going to put money towards that if that money could go towards other things that would keep people more safe.
Let's be clear. One of the reasons that you stopped greasing the polls was because of the cost.
Yes, given that it wasn't as effective as we needed it to be, cost was, of course, that.
I want to talk about one of the other reasons. Because one of the reasons you stopped greasing those polls is because it was bad for PR.
I'm sure if you follow the news, you know what people like to say about Philadelphians and what we do after the sports. It had become a bit of a joke that we greased the polls. So the public relations image, it wasn't great.
One of the reasons you stopped greasing those polls is because people were making fun of it on Twitter.
People were saying, weren't taking it seriously. They were suggesting that greasing those polls was a joke. This is also another reason that people were encouraged to climb the polls. It became a chant at games, grease the polls.
And one of the reasons that wasn't listed for why you stopped greasing the polls, it wasn't a study that said it was unsafe.
No, we didn't do a study. The games like this are so few and far between, there isn't a lot of data on.
It wasn't an outside expert who said it wasn't safe.
No, there was no outside expert that consulted on this change in the plan.
The bottom line, Ms. Edwards, is that you switched to putting up fences.
Yes, we piloted the fence program for the 2025 Super Bowl.
You stopped greasing the polls.
We did.
You would agree that now you should have done both.
I agree that the fences were effective and there are other measures that can potentially be taken in the future. You know, our safety plans are meant to keep as many people safe as possible, but they're not perfect. And that's something we know.
Apologies. Did you finish your answer?
I did, I'm sorry.
That's a yes, that you should have done both.
The greasing the polls was no longer effective and was no longer something that we were going to pay for if it wasn't keeping people safe and was actually making it riskier.
Ms. Edwards, you could have done both.
Sure, we could have greased the polls to encourage people to climb them while the fences were there.
But you didn't.
I'm sorry.
You didn't do both.
We didn't do both, no. Again, the greasing was attracting people to those poles to climb them. We wanted to do the opposite, keep them away, and the fence was our solution.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. No further questions.
We do have a redirect. And I just have one question for you. Plaintiff's counsel talked a lot about whether or not those poles were greased, but I want to be clear. When they were greased, did people still climb them?
Yes, the first time they were greased, about 10 people climbed them, and the last time we greased them, it was up to 15 people that climbed them, even while they were covered in grease.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Recross, Your Honor.
Sure.
Ms. Edwards, when the poles were greased, did anybody die?
No, there was no injuries or deaths while the poles were greased, but an increase in the number of people who were willing to climb them.
And when they weren't greased, did anybody die?
Objection under Rule 4 of 3. This is substantially more misleading than it is probative. May I explain? Sure. Plaintiff's counsel keeps conflating the two different safety programs when in reality, there were very different situations. They keep on talking about how multiple people would have died. But to be clear, Your Honor, there was fences in one instance and not fences in the other. This testimony goes to mislead the jury because they're talking about two completely different safety plans here and comparing the death counts. It's inadmissible. Response?
Yes, Your Honor. This argument goes exclusively to the weight that this evidence should be given. It's not an evidentiary concern to ask the witness about what happened when they greased the poles and when they didn't.
Your Honor, may I respond to that? It absolutely is an argument for admissibility. They're conflating the two safety plans that are in contention today. That's misleading.
I think it's up to the jury to give the witness the testimony. I don't think it's the question in and of itself is misleading. So I'm gonna let it.
Yes, Your Honor. After you stopped greasing the poles, how many people died?
One person died without the fence in place, and one person died with the fence in place.
No further questions.
All right, Ms. Edwards, you're excused. Thank you very much. So we're gonna move right on closing. Feel free to take a minute to get whatever you need more. If you need to participate exhibits from members of the jury, please.
Yes. They should have done both. After everything that we've learned about the Super Bowl of 2025, there is one thing that is not in contention. The city of Philadelphia owed their citizens a duty of care. They were responsible for the safety of their people, for keeping the people who were celebrating the city's big win on the streets safe. But they failed their citizens and they failed their city. Because they didn't do both, Sam Farnsworth is dead. And that is why we, as the plaintiff, on behalf of Mr. Farnsworth's family, are suing the city of Philadelphia for negligence. Now, like I told you earlier, we have a burden of proof to prove to you that it was the city's actions and the actions that they didn't take that were the most likely and most responsible cause of Sam's death. And today, we met that burden through both of the witnesses that testified in front of you. First, you heard from Lanny Davis. That was the person who actually climbed the pole. And she told you that there was a fence in front of the pole she climbed. But she could just climb right over it. And the police, they didn't do anything to stop her. But then she told you that if the pole had just been greased, that she wouldn't have climbed it. She would never have been up there. And Sam would still be alive today. It is as simple as that. Now, the defense all day today have tried to tell you it's not the city's fault, that it's Lanny's fault. But when Miss Walker Edwards testified for you, we learned whose fault it really was.
Because she told you how for years the city dealt with pole climbers. They would grease the poles. And it worked. In 2018, the first celebration, they greased the poles and no one got hurt. In 2018, the second celebration, they greased the poles and no one got hurt. In 2022, they greased the poles and no one got hurt. 2023, they greased the poles and no one got hurt. 5 years and 4 celebrations, nobody got hurt because they greased the poles. But then, the first time ever that they didn't grease the poles, the first celebration of 2025, man dies. The worst part about it is that that man wasn't Sam Farnsworth. The city knew that their new pilot program was dangerous. And instead of committing to greasing the poles again, the thing they know worked, they chose to roll the dice again. 2 weeks later, another celebration comes by. They don't grease the poles, and another man dies. We know that they could have done it. So why didn't they? Well, when we asked Miss Edwards about it, she told you that greasing the poles was bad for PR. She knew all of these articles and news reports and Twitter and tweets off the top of her head, the ones that were making fun of her in the city. That is not a reasonable decision for a person in charge of a city's safety to make. And today, after having met that burden, we have proven to you that they shouldn't have just fenced the poles, and they shouldn't have just greased the poles. All they had to do was do both. It is because they did it that Sam Farnsworth is no longer with us. That's why you have to find the defendant, the city of Philadelphia, liable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great defense.
Yes, Your Honor. There are some things that everyone in this courtroom can agree on. Everyone agrees. The loss of life in this case was a tragedy. Everyone agrees. Someone's choices cut that young man's life short. And everyone agrees. The person who made those choices needs to be held responsible. But where we disagree, and what this case really comes down to, is who that person was. And the plaintiff hasn't proven it was our city, or anyone who were. No, today we proved that it was Lanny Davidson. Lanny Davidson chose risk over reason. And that's why we brought that counterclaim of comparative negligence against the plaintiff. Now, as the judge will explain, as the defense, we didn't have to take on a burden of proof today. We didn't have to call any witnesses or enter any evidence or have Ms. Davidson or have our witness come up on that stand and tell you what mistakes should be passed. That's a decision we made on purpose. Because we now, members of the jury, that someone needs to be held responsible for this tragic loss of life. But it's not our city. And to help you see what? To help you see who's really responsible, let's go back to those 3 questions I asked you at the beginning of this trial. First, did our city care about keeping its citizens safe? Because lately the plaintiff's been throwing around some pretty big accusations that we cut to save money, to save face. But remember the evidence that actually made it onto the record. Time and time again on the stand today, Ms. Evans told me the decision she made over carefully, calculated plan. That she launched a social media campaign as a CN Exhibit 33, specifically designed to appeal to young people, to appeal to people like the people who lost their lives. But it wasn't enough. And then we showed you this new post, Exhibit 35. A fence designed to keep people from making dangerous and deadly decisions. But on the stand today, Lanny Davidson admitted she just went around. That she hopped that fence and climbed it. And that's what causes tragedy. Members of the jury can imagine our city and what in place. They're not things you just do for. They're things that you do because you care. But at some point, you just can't prevent careless and stupid decisions. What is the plaintiff asking me to believe our city was responsible? Teaching people not to walk into oncoming traffic. It's just not reasonable. It's not what their duty requires. Which brings us to that next question. Were our city's actions reasonable? Now, all day the plaintiff's been saying, oh, it's so simple. All they had to do was vote. But the only qualified expert who took that stand and justified today told you that's just not true. That they cut that recent measure for a reason. That our city became the butt of a national joke. That people were treating it like a challenge to climb those goals, and it got worse and worse as time went on. That's the reason we didn't just do both. That's the reason we piloted these two measures, because we know members of the jury, just like you, that pressing those polls isn't enough. Brings us to our third and final question. Who did Sam beg to stop? And members of the jury, the answer to this one is as simple as it is tragic. Lanny Davidson. Today we proved, and Lanny Davidson admitted, she climbed that. Climbed it even when Sam begged her not once, not twice, but 3 times to do that. That she ignored that fence, ignored her friend's warnings. And we understand, just like you do that, she's just as much of a victim in this case as her friend. That what happened to her was terrible. But when you took an oath to be a juror in this case, you decided. You have an obligation to separate facts and how you feel. And it would be so easy to give in to the anger and the pain. I know the fear. But it wouldn't be right. No, it's your responsibility. Hold people accountable for the reckless decisions they make, even if they were wrong. And today we proved that that tragic accident wasn't our city's fault. That our city cared deeply about protecting its people. That our city took reasonable measures to keep its people safe. But it just wasn't enough. As Lanny Davidson chose risk over reason that day. And it's because of that careless and reckless choice that we asked that you find the city of Philadelphia not liable. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor. In a moment, when we're all done here, you're going to go back to deliberate. And the judge is going to instruct you to find out who is most at fault for Sam's death. You can look at it through the defense's lens. Who was it that chose risk over reason? The defense, they've been telling you all trial that it was the fans' fault. And one of their 3 questions, it was, does the city care?
And if you're looking for an answer, you don't need to look any further than the Director of Safety of Philadelphia. Because she told you her opinion of her job and the fans that she's required to protect. You can't stop stupid. Ms. Claypoole just got up here and told you that greasing the poles, it wasn't enough, so they needed to try something new, a new pilot program. But you heard the numbers yourself. Greasing the poles resulted in 0 deaths, 0 people getting hurt for 7 years in a span of 2 weeks. Not greasing the poles resulted in 2 deaths. It was the city, it was the safety director who took that risk, and they had absolutely no reason to justify it. It could not be more obvious that they should have done both. And it is for that reason that you must find them liable. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much. Give us a couple minutes to fill out our ballot, and then we can get it all there to the end sort of comments, so feel free to head up, look around, and I'll let you know.